If Missouri's going to beat Tennessee on the road, they're probably going to have to exploit the good but slightly overrated Zakai Zeigler.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. Coming up on today's program, some more hype for Damon Wilson, the Georgia edge transfer to Missouri. It really helps buoy Brian Smith's hot take from the other day on the Portal program. But you know what? Before we start, I want to tell you today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first ticket purchase. And I want to start off the program by talking about Zakai Zeigler because, number one, this is a really new-look Tennessee Volunteer team compared to the last couple of years. But if you're a Missouri fan, you've followed basketball or just college basketball in general, Zakai Zeigler is one of those names you're going to be very well aware of. And because of that, well, I think he gets a lot of hype that honestly is maybe a little bit undeserved. Now, don't get me wrong here. Zeigler is a good player. I just think because of his name value and recognition, well, he's become a little bit overrated, considering that against against Kentucky a couple games ago, you see Zeigler actually sat out the previous game against Florida. So I thought, you know what? Let's see Tennessee more at full strength. Let's go see them against Kentucky from a couple of games ago. And despite starting the game 1 of 6 from the floor, the ESPN crew really couldn't stop slobbering all over Zakai Zeigler, to be honest with you, calling him one of the best 7 or 8 players in the entire country. And I'll just say this, I'm not trading Caleb Grill for him. I'll tell you that right now. And again, Zeigler is a good player. He's a really good, actually I should say he's an excellent pass-first type of point guard, probably the best assist man in the SEC, if not the entire country. But for people to say that Zeigler is a good to great defensive player, well, that's where I'm going to draw the line, because while he's a great steal guy statistically, he's also 5'9" and 170 pounds. I'm sorry, those are the type of players that are exploited frequently in modern high pick and roll type of basketball, for example. So to me, a guy who's obviously exploitable on the defensive end, and a guy who offensively, while again a great assist man, an excellent free throw shooter, not a good scorer overall, only making just shy of 28% of his threes on the season, about 47% of his twos. And actually both of those numbers go down pretty significantly against Tier A and B competition and against SEC competition as well. So similarly to me, based on the previous matchup against Mississippi State, which I liked for Missouri and picked the Tigers to win, based largely on, I thought Josh Hubbard was a guy that Missouri could bother. Another undersized point guard who is, well, to put it obviously, to make an obvious statement, I should say, Hubbard is a much, much more dangerous scorer than Zeigler. Now, on the other hand, Zeigler is a pass-first point guard and much more of a playmaker than is Hubbard. But again, their relative lack of size, I think if Missouri traps Zeigler just as they trapped Hubbard early in the game, I think Mississippi State and Tennessee have some similar offensive deficiencies, whereas you throw it to the wings and they don't have a reliable scorer on the wing, to me, or a reliable shooter, spot-up shooter, or at least multiple of them, like Caleb Grill and like Tamar Bates, for example. Now, don't get me wrong, Tennessee does have one very good shooter for sure in Chaz Lanier. As long as Missouri can find Chaz Lanier on the outside, I think they'll probably be okay. But defensively, well, that's a whole other question, because Tennessee is probably the best defensive team in the country right now. In fact, statistically, they are the number one defensive team in the country. In conference play, they're maybe second or third. And for the second time in 3 years, Tennessee has the best three-point defense percentage as well. And considering how many long, switchable, mobile, agile type of players that Tennessee has on its roster, really aside from Zeigler, it's obvious why, and with the coaching of Rick Barnes as well, it's quite obvious why Tennessee is an excellent three-point defense team. This is not a fluke, is mainly what I'm trying to say. So Missouri, which has become, I don't know if reliant is the right word, but certainly the three-pointer has been a massive part of their offense here, especially in conference play, and a very effective one at that. If Tennessee's able to bother Caleb Grill at all, get Missouri off of its game, well, I think it could potentially be a long night for Missouri. Now, on the other hand, you're looking at the point spread in this game. Let me see. Let me pull it up here rather quickly, as quickly as I can anyway, here on FanDuel. I know Missouri's about a 9-point underdog here, and quite honestly, that seems a little bit high, not because Tennessee can't pull away from Missouri and cover that spread, but I think Missouri has a legitimate chance to win this game tonight. I really do. And here we go. 8.5 is the spread. Tennessee is the favorite over at FanDuel Sportsbook. So to me, the fact that I think Missouri has a legitimate shot to win this ball game, I'd give the 8.5 points. Might even take the plus 340 on an outright win on the money line as well. I will say this, though. Unlike the Mississippi State game where I did go out on a limb and pick Missouri to win outright, I don't think I'm going to do that tonight, simply because it does look like Tennessee is going to be at full strength after, well, beating Florida by 20 at home at the Thompson Bowling Arena, despite not having Zakai Zeigler in that game. And maybe just as importantly, they also didn't have Igor Milicic in that game either. Milicic sat out the game with the flu. He's expected to play tonight, but he's also been fighting through a bit of a calf injury all season too. So here's the thing with Milicic to me. I think he's probably the fulcrum player for the Volunteers, because when he gets it going offensively, he's probably a 6'9", 6'10" type of guy with some skills and can put the ball on the floor, can make a three-pointer, but is only about a 29% shooter overall. So if Milicic is challenged to make open shots by Missouri and he can make them pay, well, suddenly that just opens up the entire floor for Zeigler and that Tennessee offense and makes them so much more difficult to beat. So let's watch for Igor Milicic. I think he's the key to the entire game for Tennessee. If Missouri can maybe dare him to shoot and it works out for the Tigers, I think you could be looking at yet another Missouri road victory. Although, again, I'm just not quite confident enough to go out on a limb and pick Missouri to win outright at this moment. And that's simply just a respect mostly for that Tennessee defense. If we were playing at home, well, then I'd pick the Tigers. By the way, I do want to quickly correct myself here. I looked back in my notes. Tennessee, not only number one overall in the nation defensively, they're also number one in SEC play as well. I think I downgraded them to second or third, but regardless, this is an elite, if not the absolute elite defensive team in the entire country. So that alone makes it tough for me to go out on a limb and pick Missouri to win tonight. Again, more about Tennessee than it is Missouri, but once again, I give the Tigers a real good chance to win tonight, and I'll explain why coming up here in just a little bit. And also, even more hype for Damon Wilson. Sounds like the Tigers really found something at the edge rusher position this offseason. But first, let me tell you that Gametime is absolutely the best place to find tickets to your next event, whether it's a concert, a comedy show, of course, a sporting event as well. Finding the right ticket at the right place, at the right price can be a headache, but with Gametime picks, it's never been easier. Just open up the app, just make one click on Gametime picks, and I'm telling you, their AI, whatever their algorithm is going to give you exactly what you want 9 out of 10 times right at the top of your screen. the best value. You don't have to just spend all your time browsing through all the different options. Just make it easier with Gametime. And if you find a deal somewhere else, they'll refund you with 110% of the difference. That's a heck of a guarantee. So if you're ready for your next event and ready to make it even better, download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And by the way, I'm going to be on the SEC squad tomorrow afternoon once again, and a little bit of a spoiler for that show when I brought up Brian Smith's take that Damon Wilson, the former Georgia edge rusher who is transferring to Missouri, I brought up that Brian Smith, the scoutmaster, thought that he was possibly the best guy in the entire transfer portal. Well, Clint Shamblin of Locked On Bulldogs definitely raised his eyebrows, quite literally, at that statement, even though Shamblin, I know, as I've shared with all of you on this show, is a big fan and believer of Damon Wilson. He was caught off guard by that one. But I have to say, 24/7 Sports, at least one of their writers, definitely agrees with Brian Smith, who has Damon Wilson all the way at number 2. Yes, not number 1, but number 2. Hey, we'll take it, close enough for government work. And Damon Wilson, for sure, ranked just ahead of Carson Beck, by the way, the former Georgia quarterback who is off to the University of Miami. The writer here, by the way, Cooper Petagania. Well, yeah, we'll go with that. Sure, why not? He says, Damon Wilson, a former highly touted pass rusher with an elite combination of speed, quickness, and power off the edge. Wilson's flashes of high-level play and physical traits suggest he has the ability to develop into a potential day one NFL draft choice and one of the nation's most productive pass rushers. His 98 rating makes him a 5-star transfer. So again, a lot of praise for Damon Wilson, especially for a guy who Missouri got relatively late in the portal process. That's generally not when you get the elite players. So this was quite the coup late in the portal game for Eli Drinkwitz and his staff. And the idea that, hey, he has all the physical tools and apparently, according to Brian Smith, all of the sort of intangible skills, I would think, as a human being as well, to develop into a potential day one NFL draft choice. And the key word, I think, there is develop. I think Missouri's coaching staff has done an excellent job of developing defensive linemen here over the recent years. So I would give Damon Wilson a great chance to live up to his potential at Missouri. Great news if you're a Tiger football fan. And if you're an everydayer, an everyday listener, viewer of this program, you know I've been talking a little bit about the Kirby Moore, his status with Missouri. Will he be following Kellen Moore, his brother, who is the presumed next head coach of the New Orleans Saints? Well, my guess is, I've been guessing that Kirby is going to stick around. You all know that. But I also am not 100% sure on that. Certainly not willing to bet my life on it whatsoever. But regardless, I would just tell Missouri fans to get used to this kind of talk just about every offseason, whether it's somebody like Blake Baker or Kirby Moore. If Missouri's going to continue to be good, well, this is sort of the cost of doing business. When you're a successful program, a successful team, naturally, other programs are interested in your coordinators and even NFL teams. For example, Ohio State, your national champions, just brought Chip Kelly in famously. Well, just for 1 year, it turned out, because Kelly is now off to the Las Vegas Raiders for more money. He's going to get about $6 million a year, reportedly. So, frankly, this is the coordinator chase at the highest level. It's the NFL, and then it's the Big Ten and the SEC, and then it's everybody else, quite honestly. So if you're going to swim in that big pond in the quadruple A of football, it's going to cost you some money. And with that $6 million that Tom Brady and the Las Vegas Raiders decided to hand out to Chip Kelly, Well, that really did reset the coordinator market because this past season, $3 million a year was the highest offensive coordinators. Two of those guys were tied for tops in the league. So that is a real reset. And while the New Orleans Saints, again, I've speculated that I don't think they're going to break the bank for a coordinator. Well, that may change the calculation a little bit if the market is reset. Still, as I'm sitting here trying to guess, I'll guess Kirby Moore is still with Missouri next season, but you know what? We'll probably have to find out early next week. Now, one reason I couldn't be bold enough to take Missouri outright to win the game tonight is, quite honestly, the road whistle scares me, especially against a defensive team like Tennessee can absolutely smother you. Well, similarly, a couple years ago, Tennessee had the #1 overall defense nationally as well. And despite Missouri getting out to a huge lead in the first half against the Volunteers, well, in the second half, it just felt like the physicality for Tennessee was just allowed to take over, and Missouri could basically do nothing offensively in the second half. But fortunately, the Tigers had built such a large lead at that the Tigers, well, trailing by 2 with 4.2 seconds left. Well, fortunately, DeAndre Golston decided to call game. Yes, any excuse to show that great shot in Mizzou history, I will take it. But I will say, if the physicality is ramped up like it was a couple years ago in the second half, well, I will say this is a different Missouri basketball team. This is a much bigger, more athletic, and honestly just tough Missouri basketball team than the team that we all loved a couple years ago that won that game. I think especially I'm not just talking about pure size in the post either. I mean the ball handlers for Missouri. You look at Tony Perkins, you look at Anthony Robinson, a couple of bigger guys that are not going to just be pushed off of their spot by the Tennessee defenders. So if there is a reason to start feeling confident tonight, that's it. But on the other side of the equation, don't exactly look for Missouri to get the benefit of the doubt from the officials tonight. That's the way it goes on any road game in the SEC, including for our opponents at Mizzou Arena, quite frankly. And in just a little bit, I want to talk about my hopes for March Madness, at least the floor for March Madness this season for Missouri, and also an optimistic Trent Burns update from Mizzou today that I'm not totally sure that I'm buying. So let's talk about that right after these quick words. So obviously, tournament runs are probably what is discussed more by college basketball fans than anything. When you look back at a season, you think, oh, that was the year we made the Elite Eight or lost in the first round to Northern Iowa or whatever it might be. And of course, in a season that has more than 30 games in it, that can feel pretty reductive. So I wouldn't say I only care about an NCAA tournament run. I certainly just don't think of, well, are the Tigers a Sweet 16 team? Are they a Final Four team? Again, I'm just not sure that's the best way to actually analyze what you're seeing because, well, there is a lot of random chance in terms of, just off nights, bad nights, matchups, all that kind of stuff. Teams in front of you getting upset. There's a lot of things out of your control in the NCAA tournament, among a lot of other different variables. But I will say this. Speaking of Northern Iowa, heck, let's bring up Norfolk State, too, from 2012. To me, that is the worst feeling in sports. And what I mean by that is after you've had a huge season, you're a number 2 seed in the tournament, you're a number 3 seed. I believe it was the 91 Tigers, correct me if I'm wrong, who lost to Northern Iowa. Regardless, that was a 3 seed, a team that had fallen off at the very end of the season, but had so many great moments. And a team that had combined Doug Smith with his senior year with the the finale, the beginnings of the true freshman, Melvin Booker, Javon Crudup, that class that would make history with the Tigers as well. And yet, all anybody ever thinks about for the most part, we lost in the first round to Northern Iowa. Same thing with Norfolk State, unfortunately. So I've had that feeling before, and I'll tell you this, I don't think I've ever felt worse after a loss than after that Norfolk State game to this day. And that was when I was 29 years old, too. I wasn't like a small child then either. I was quite a bit older than the guys who were playing in that game, and yet I almost hyperventilated after this game. I think I may have slightly. But regardless, I was also thinking as a sports fan, okay, that's the worst experience. What's the second worst experience? I've seen the Kansas City Chiefs have home field advantage in the playoffs, only to lose in the first round, the no punt game of 03-04, of course, the Lynn Elliott game, the Jim Harbaugh captain comeback game. Well, I think that's the second most brutal thing in sports. I'm not a diehard NHL fan, but I've heard overtime playoff losses are pretty brutal as well. But you know what? On the injury report today, just a couple names on the list for Missouri and Tennessee. One for Tennessee is a young man named J.P. Estrella, who is not a huge update here, as he's out for the game. Well, he's been out since game 3 or 4 for Tennessee. He only played in the first 3 ball games of the year for Tennessee here so far. And same deal with Trent Burns, a young man who has not seen the floor this season. According to Mizzou today, though, they said he's out of his walking boot and has been walking around at games and practices without a noticeable limp. And the always optimistic Dennis Gates keeps saying that he expects Burns to play this season. Again, expects is the important word there. But regardless, at this point, Burns has sat out enough that even if he plays in every game the rest of this season, his redshirt status is not in jeopardy. So regardless of that, though, while the pressure of that decision is now off of the Missouri staff, I don't know, I think at this point, it's now February 5th. Burns not going to play tonight. There's no real indication that he's going to play on Saturday. It just seems really unlikely that he plays any minutes at all this season. Certainly not any significant minutes, especially with the type of depth that you have on this Missouri basketball team. For the most part, if Missouri needs a center, they're going to play Josh Gray. And we've already got a true freshman backup in Peyton Marshall that has proven capable in limited minutes. I think it would be, frankly, almost unfair to put Trent Burns out there, a guy who everybody acknowledges is a bit of a project at this point, and yet a lot of high hopes for him. So regardless, again, walking boot, foot injuries, lower body injuries for massively tall guys like Trent Burns. Be as conservative with them as you possibly can. Let's see Trent Burns and what he can do next season for a team that could look quite a bit different. A lot of guys graduating next year. Perhaps Peyton Marshall and Trent Burns really are all what you need at the 5 in 25-26. But regardless, thanks so much for joining me here on Locked On Mizzou. Thanks for making this show your first listen every day. And for your second listen, check out Locked On SEC. I'm on the squad once again on tomorrow's program, so get out in front of it. Subscribe to Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And until next time, which will be tonight, by the way, after the Missouri-Tennessee game, going to do a quick recap. Hopefully, we'll have a nice win. Maybe Missouri going to get into the top 10 after tonight. It's exciting times. Let's let our imaginations run wild. And until then, I'm John Miller. Thanks for listening to Locked On Mizzou.